preparing a massive financial package to lure Clark away from Indiana, with some reports and fan speculation putting the rumored offer at around $1 million. Now, let's be very clear. There is no confirmed announcement that Caitlin Clark is leaving the Fever, and there is no verified evidence that the Liberty have officially submitted a $1 million offer. But the rumor itself is creating a huge conversation because of one uncomfortable question. Could frustration inside Indiana eventually push Clark toward the door? The speculation comes after months of debate surrounding Clark's treatment, coaching decisions, physical contact on the court, officiating, and whether the Fever organization is doing enough to protect its biggest star. And then there's the New York Liberty. Clark has obvious connections within the basketball world, including her well-known relationship with Sabrina Ionescu. She has also recently been associated with Liberty-themed merchandise, which has only given fans more material to speculate about. That does not prove a trade is happening. But in the world of professional sports, when a superstar becomes the center of a storm and another major franchise appears to have an opportunity, fans immediately start asking the same question. What if Caitlin Clark really does leave Indiana? Would the Fever fight to keep her? Would Indiana make changes to its coaching structure? Could New York actually become a realistic destination? And most importantly, is this entire situation simply fan speculation, or is there something bigger developing behind the scenes? Because the deeper you look at the story, the more complicated it becomes. Clark has openly acknowledged that the pressure, criticism, harassment, and constant attention surrounding her career can be emotionally difficult. In the transcript, she emphasizes that she is human, has feelings, and that the negativity can affect her more than fans sometimes realize. So tonight, we're breaking down the rumor, the coaching controversy, the Liberty connection, and the one decision that could completely change the future of the Indiana Fever. Because if Caitlin Clark ever reaches the point where she says, "I've had enough," the entire WNBA could feel the consequences. And that is where this story gets really interesting. For months, Caitlin Clark has been at the center of virtually every major conversation surrounding the Indiana Fever. Every game, every coaching decision, every hard foul, every controversial call, and every moment of frustration seems to generate another debate. But now, a much bigger question is taking over the conversation. What if Caitlin Clark actually has a reason to consider leaving Indiana? That is the question behind the explosive rumor involving the New York Liberty and a reported $1 million financial offer. Again, this is important. There is no confirmed public announcement that Caitlin Clark is leaving the Fever, and the supposed $1 million Liberty offer has not been established as an official deal. What exists is a combination of speculation, fan theories, commentary, and a storyline that has become increasingly difficult for basketball fans to ignore. And that's exactly why this rumor has exploded. The transcript behind this story frames the situation as a potential breakdown between Clark and the Fever coaching structure. It suggests that some fans believe Clark has not received enough protection from opposing physical play and that questions have emerged about coaching decisions surrounding her availability and role. Whether every one of those claims is accurate is another question. But perception matters. In professional sports, a superstar doesn't have to publicly announce that she is unhappy for fans to start asking questions. Sometimes, the smallest details become fuel for a much larger narrative. A facial expression, a post-game comment, a difficult loss, a coaching decision, a moment on the sideline, or even something as simple as a player appearing in merchandise connected to another team. Suddenly, fans start connecting dots. And that is exactly what happened here. The New York Liberty have become a particularly fascinating part of the discussion because of Caitlin's existing connections to players in New York. Sabrina Ionescu has a long-standing relationship with Clark, and that relationship has made the Liberty a natural destination for hypothetical trade conversations among fans. Then came another detail that made people talk. The transcript points to Clark promoting or being associated with Liberty-themed CC1 shoes, something that some fans interpreted as a possible signal. Now, does wearing or promoting Liberty-themed merchandise mean Caitlin Clark wants to join the Liberty? Absolutely not. Athletes collaborate with brands. Players wear different products. Friendships exist across teams. Social media posts can be completely innocent. But when the player involved is Caitlin Clark, almost nothing stays innocent in the eyes of the internet. Every action becomes a potential headline. And this is where the story becomes bigger than a pair of shoes. The real issue is the growing debate over whether Indiana is giving Clark the environment she needs to reach her full potential. Clark is not simply another player on the roster. She is one of the biggest stars in women's basketball, and the Fever have built an enormous amount of attention around her arrival. That creates pressure on everyone. The front office has pressure. The coaching staff has pressure. Her teammates have pressure. And Clark herself has pressure. The transcript highlights Clark discussing the emotional weight of harassment, criticism, and constant attention. She explains that she is not a robot and that, despite her experience, the negativity can still affect her. That part of the story deserves attention because it changes the way fans should look at everything. Imagine being 24 years old, becoming one of the most recognizable athletes in the world, walking into every arena knowing thousands of people are watching you, and then having every mistake analyzed immediately. Now, add physical play, add criticism, add coaching decisions, add social media, add expectations to win, and then add rumors that another major franchise might want you. Suddenly, the question becomes much more complicated. It's not simply, does Caitlin Clark want to leave? It's, what kind of environment does Caitlin Clark want around her for the next stage of her career? That's the question Indiana should be paying attention to. Because even if the Liberty rumor turns out to be completely false, the fact that so many fans are willing to believe it tells us something about the current conversation. People are fascinated by the possibility because New York represents almost everything a superstar could want. A massive market, a championship-caliber organization, established stars, national attention, and perhaps most importantly, existing relationships inside the basketball community. But Indiana has something New York cannot simply manufacture overnight. It has Caitlin Clark's history with the franchise. The Fever selected her with the first overall pick, and Clark became the face of the team's future. She has already helped transform the attention surrounding Indiana. So if the Fever ever allowed the relationship to deteriorate to the point where Clark seriously considered another destination, the consequences would be enormous. Not just for Indiana, for the entire WNBA. And that's why the coaching conversation matters so much. The transcript repeatedly describes a perception among some fans that the Fever coaching staff has failed to protect or properly utilize Clark. But here's the twist. A controversial coaching decision does not automatically mean betrayal. A disagreement does not automatically mean a player wants out. And a difficult season does not automatically mean a franchise relationship has collapsed. Those distinctions are extremely important, because once a rumor becomes viral, speculation can quickly start looking like fact. And that is exactly where this story becomes dangerous for the Fever. If fans believe Clark is unhappy, every coaching decision gets interpreted through that lens. If she sits, people say she's being controlled. If she struggles, people blame the coaching staff. If she speaks carefully after a game, people assume she's hiding something. If she smiles with another team's player, people call it a recruiting signal. And if she wears another team's merchandise, suddenly, the internet is ready to trade her before Indiana has even had a chance to respond. But there is one question that remains unanswered. What happens if the Liberty actually do make a serious move? Because if New York were ever to put together a legitimate package for Clark, Indiana would face an impossible decision. Do they shut the door immediately? Do they listen? Do they change the coaching structure? Do they make Clark the unquestioned center of the franchise? Or do they risk allowing uncertainty to grow? And somewhere in the middle of all this sits Caitlin Clark herself. She has not publicly confirmed that she wants out. She has not officially announced that she wants to join New York. And there is no verified confirmation that a $1 million Liberty offer exists. But the rumor has already accomplished something powerful. It has forced everyone to ask whether the relationship between Caitlin Clark and Indiana Fever is as secure as people once assumed. And if that question continues growing, the Fever may eventually have to answer it. Because when the biggest star on your team becomes the subject of another franchise's biggest hypothetical acquisition, you don't ignore the noise. You find out why the noise is getting louder. And this is where the story takes another dramatic turn. If Caitlin Clark really were unhappy in Indiana, there would be one team that immediately makes sense as a potential destination: the New York Liberty.
Why?
Because New York already has the kind of environment that makes every superstar rumor dangerous. The Liberty have elite talent, championship ambitions, a huge market, and players who already have connections with Clark. And that is exactly why fans started putting the pieces together. The transcript points toward Clark's relationship with Sabrina Ionescu as one of the reasons the Liberty theory has become so attractive to fans. But friendship alone doesn't mean a trade is coming. That's where the speculation gets complicated. Fans see Clark connected to Liberty-related products. They see her friendship with Sabrina. They see the ongoing debates about Indiana's coaching decisions. And suddenly, one question dominates: social media. Could New York actually be trying to get Caitlin Clark? The transcript takes that theory even further, suggesting that New York could see an opportunity if frustration inside Indiana continues to grow. Again, there is no verified confirmation that the Liberty have officially offered Clark $1 million. But as a hypothetical, it is enormous. Because imagine what would happen if a legitimate offer actually appeared. Indiana would have to make a decision that could define the franchise for years. Do they immediately reject it? Do they attempt to repair the relationship? Do they change the coaching structure? Or do they simply trust that Clark remains committed to the Fever? Those questions become even more interesting because Clark has already spoken publicly about the emotional difficulty of dealing with constant criticism and harassment. She has made it clear that she is human, that she has emotions, and that the pressure can sometimes affect her more than people realize. That doesn't mean she wants to leave Indiana. But it does remind fans that there is a real person behind the superstar image. And that matters. Because sometimes the biggest mistake a franchise can make is assuming that a superstar will tolerate anything simply because she is under contract. A superstar still needs trust. A superstar still needs communication. And a superstar still needs to believe the organization is building toward the same goal. That's where the Fever coaching debate becomes so important. The transcript describes a perception among some fans that Clark has been exposed to excessive physical play without enough protection, while also questioning certain decisions involving her playing time and availability. Whether those accusations are accurate is something that should be separated from the rumor itself. But the perception has become part of the story, and perception can become powerful. If enough fans believe a star is being mishandled, every future decision gets examined differently. One lineup change becomes controversial. One timeout becomes suspicious. One substitution becomes a debate. One post-game answer becomes evidence. Suddenly, the entire organization is under a microscope. And that is exactly the environment the Fever are now trying to navigate. The Liberty, meanwhile, don't even have to confirm anything for the rumor to grow. They simply have to remain a logical, hypothetical destination. That alone is enough to keep the conversation alive. And then there is the financial angle. A supposed $1 million offer sounds enormous, but the bigger question isn't simply the number. It's what that number would represent. It would represent another organization potentially saying, "We believe Caitlin Clark is worth building around." For a player who has become one of the biggest names in women's basketball, that message would carry tremendous emotional weight.
But there is another side to this.
Indiana drafted Clark. Indiana gave her the platform. Indiana has built part of its identity around her. And Clark has helped transform the attention surrounding the franchise. So if the relationship ever reached the point of separation, both sides would lose something. That's why the most interesting part of this entire rumor may not actually be New York. It may be Indiana's response. If the Fever want to silence the speculation, they don't necessarily need a press conference. They need action, better communication, clearer leadership, a stronger environment, and most importantly, a reason for Clark to believe her future is still brighter in Indiana than anywhere else. Because once a superstar starts being linked to another franchise, the question isn't only whether the rumor is true. The question becomes, why did fans believe it could be true in the first place? And that is the uncomfortable question the Fever cannot afford to ignore. But if the Liberty rumor is one side of the story, The other side is the growing criticism surrounding the Indiana Fever's coaching situation. This is where the word betrayal started appearing in the conversation. Not because Caitlin Clark has publicly confirmed that she feels betrayed, but because some fans believe the organization has failed to give its biggest star the protection, support, and consistency she deserves. The transcript pushes this argument heavily, particularly around physical contact against Clark and questions about how the coaching staff responded. And once those questions started circulating, the debate became much bigger than basketball. Fans began asking whether Indiana was actually maximizing Clark's potential. Was the system designed around her strengths? Was she being protected properly? Were coaching decisions helping her grow? Or was the organization creating unnecessary frustration? Those questions are impossible to ignore when you're talking about a player with this level of attention. Every time Clark gets knocked down, social media explodes. Every time a foul isn't called, fans demand answers. Every time she comes out of a game, someone starts asking whether something is wrong. And every time the Fever lose, the coaching staff becomes one of the first targets. That's the dangerous part. Even if individual decisions are perfectly reasonable, repeated controversy can create a perception that something bigger is wrong. And perception can damage trust. The transcript also raises accusations about injury reporting and suggests that some fans believe Clark's availability has been handled in a questionable way. Those claims should not be treated as established facts without evidence. But they reveal something important about the current fan conversation. People are no longer simply debating Clark's statistics. They are debating whether she is being treated properly. And that is a completely different conversation. Because when fans begin discussing a superstar's relationship with her own organization, the next question is always about the future. Could the player eventually ask for something different? Could the organization make changes before that happens? Could another franchise take advantage of the uncertainty? That's exactly where the New York Liberty enter the picture again. New York doesn't need to publicly announce a pursuit of Clark for fans to imagine the possibility. The Liberty already have the stars, the market, and the championship ambitions. And Clark's friendship with Sabrina Ionescu makes the hypothetical even more compelling. Imagine the headlines if Clark and Ionescu ever became teammates. Imagine the social media explosion. Imagine the ticket demand. Imagine the television numbers. Imagine the merchandise. From a purely entertainment perspective, it would be one of the biggest stories the WNBA could possibly create. But from Indiana's perspective, it would be a nightmare. The Fever would potentially lose the player around whom they have built their modern identity. And that is why the organization has every reason to take the rumors seriously, even if the rumors themselves aren't confirmed. The transcript describes the situation as creating pressure on the Fever front office and suggests that the organization could eventually face calls for major coaching changes. That leads to perhaps the biggest hypothetical question of all. Would Indiana change the coaching structure to keep Caitlin Clark happy? Because if the answer is yes, then the rumor has already accomplished something. It has forced the franchise to consider how valuable its relationship with Clark really is. And there is another factor fans sometimes overlook. Clark has already experienced an extraordinary amount of pressure. She has openly acknowledged that criticism and harassment can affect her emotionally, despite appearing composed publicly. So, if an organization wants to keep a player like that long-term, winning isn't the only requirement. Trust matters. Communication matters. Respect matters. And the player needs to feel that the organization is willing to stand behind her. That doesn't mean protecting her from every criticism. It means creating an environment where the player knows that disagreements can be handled internally instead of becoming public drama. And that is why this story has become so fascinating. At its core, it's not really about one alleged $1 million offer. It's about leverage. If the Liberty rumor is false, Indiana still has an opportunity to shut down the speculation through strong leadership. If the rumor has even a small amount of truth behind it, then the Fever have an even bigger problem. Because another franchise may be watching. And when another franchise starts watching your superstar, every mistake becomes more expensive. The Fever cannot control what fans say online. They cannot control every rumor. They cannot stop every hypothetical trade proposal. But they can control how they treat their franchise player. They can control communication. They can control preparation. They can control the culture inside the organization. And they can make one thing extremely clear. Caitlin Clark is part of their future. Until that message becomes unmistakable, the Liberty speculation will continue. And the longer it continues, the louder the biggest question becomes. Is Indiana still the place where Caitlin Clark wants to build her legacy? Now we reach the part of the story that could determine whether this entire Caitlin Clark, New York Liberty rumor disappears quietly or becomes one of the biggest WNBA storylines of the year. Because eventually, speculation has to meet reality. The transcript presents a dramatic scenario in which Indiana could be forced to make major changes if Clark's relationship with the organization continues deteriorating. But the biggest question isn't whether fans are angry. It isn't whether social media believes Clark should leave. And it isn't even whether New York would love to have a player of Clark's caliber. The biggest question is what Caitlin Clark herself ultimately wants. That answer has not been publicly established. And until Clark says otherwise, every prediction about her future remains speculation. Still, that hasn't stopped fans from imagining what could happen.
Picture the scenario.
Indiana decides that the criticism surrounding its coaching structure has become too damaging. The front office makes changes. The Fever promise a new approach. Clark is given a bigger voice. The organization focuses on building around her strengths. Suddenly, the Liberty rumor could disappear overnight. But now imagine the opposite. Indiana refuses to change anything. The criticism continues. The coaching debates become louder. The physical play controversy continues. The Liberty remain interested. And Clark eventually decides that another environment would give her a better chance to compete for championships. That is when the situation becomes explosive. Because if Clark ever left Indiana, it wouldn't be an ordinary player movement. It would represent a massive shift in the WNBA. The Fever would lose their biggest attraction. The Liberty could potentially gain one of the most recognizable players in the sport. And every other franchise would immediately have to reconsider the balance of power. The transcript describes the hypothetical Liberty pursuit as something that could reshape the league's future. That's dramatic language, but the underlying idea is easy to understand. Superstars change leagues. They change television conversations. They change ticket demand. They change rivalries. They change how opponents prepare. And Caitlin Clark has already demonstrated how much attention can follow her wherever she goes. That's why even an unconfirmed rumor can generate enormous interest. But there is another possibility. Maybe none of this leads to a trade. Maybe Clark remains in Indiana. Maybe the Fever improve internally. Maybe the coaching relationship becomes stronger. Maybe the organization addresses the concerns fans have been raising. And maybe, months from now, everyone looks back at the Liberty rumor and realizes it was nothing more than internet speculation. That is absolutely possible. In fact, it is something viewers should remember before believing every dramatic headline they see. Sports rumors spread incredibly quickly. A fan theory can become a social media post. A social media post can become a video. That video can become another headline. And eventually, people start treating the original speculation as if it were an official report. That's why the alleged $1 million Liberty offer needs to remain in the rumor category unless credible confirmation emerges. But even if the offer isn't real, the conversation surrounding it tells us something. Caitlin Clark has become valuable enough that fans can realistically imagine multiple franchises building around her. And New York is one of the most obvious names to appear in that conversation. The Liberty have their own identity, their own stars, and their own championship ambitions. Adding Clark would be revolutionary. But would Indiana actually allow it? That's another matter entirely. The Fever have invested too much into the Clark era to casually walk away. They drafted her. They marketed around her. They built their future around her presence. And Clark has helped elevate the team's profile dramatically. So the idea that Indiana would simply hand her to another franchise without an extraordinary reason seems difficult to imagine. Which brings us back to the supposed coaching betrayal. If the coaching controversy becomes the foundation of the rumor, then Indiana's best response isn't necessarily to attack the rumor. It's to eliminate the reason people believe it. Show Clark that the organization listens. Show her that the team has a plan. Show her that winning is the priority. and show fans that the Fever aren't wasting the opportunity they have in front of them. Because Caitlin Clark isn't going to be judged only by what she does this season. Her legacy will be shaped by what happens over the next several years, where she plays, who coaches her, which teammates surround her, whether she wins championships, and whether Indiana can build a team capable of matching the enormous expectations surrounding her. That's why this rumor matters. Not because we know Caitlin Clark is leaving. We don't. Not because we know New York has officially offered $1 million. We don't. And not because every accusation against Indiana has been proven. It hasn't. It matters because the story exposes a much bigger question about the future. Can the Indiana Fever create an environment strong enough to convince Caitlin Clark that her best future is still in Indiana? If the answer is yes, the Liberty rumor may eventually become nothing more than a wild chapter in WNBA history. But if the answer is no, then every other franchise in the league will be watching. And New York could be watching closer than anyone. Because the most dangerous moment for a franchise isn't when its superstar officially asks to leave. It's when everyone starts wondering whether she might. And right now, that's exactly where the Caitlin Clark conversation has arrived. So now the question is yours. Do you think Caitlin Clark is truly committed to building her legacy with the Indiana Fever, or could the growing pressure eventually make a move to another team possible? And what about the shocking New York Liberty rumor? Do you think $1 million offer is realistic, or is this simply another massive rumor created by the non-stop speculation surrounding Clark? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe for more Caitlin Clark and WNBA updates, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next major development. Because if something really does change between Caitlin Clark, the Fever, and the Liberty, you know we'll be watching. The next chapter could be the biggest one yet.